There is a deep ache in the human soul when injustice strikes. When betrayal, deception, or cruelty befalls us, our first instinct is often to cry out, "Where is justice? Where is God in my pain?" We look at those who have wronged us and wonder why they walk freely while we bear the wounds of their actions. But take heart. God is not blind, nor is he indifferent. The wheels of divine justice turn in ways unseen, but they turn nonetheless. The hand that governs the heavens is not idle concerning your suffering. Those who wound you may believe they have evaded consequence, but God is never mocked. He sees, he knows, and he deals with all things in perfect measure. Justice in his hands is not the fleeting, fallible retribution of man, but a justice that redeems, refines, and restores. Yet, my friends, here lies the great paradox. God does not only deal with them, he deals with you too. He is not merely concerned with punishing wrongdoing, he is committed to shaping righteousness. It is easy to focus on the downfall of our oppressors, but have we considered the transformation God seeks within us through suffering? Forgiveness is not acquittal of evil. It is the declaration that you will not be enslaved by it. The weight of bitterness is too heavy a burden for the soul meant to soar. When Christ uttered, "Father, forgive them," he was not excusing sin. He was demonstrating the power of grace. He was showing us that real justice does not only judge the guilty, it liberates the wounded. So do not be troubled when it seems as though those who hurt you walk unscathed. Their path is known to God. Some he humbles swiftly, others he allows to stumble into the consequences of their own making. But as for you, do not waste your suffering. Let it mold you. Let it draw you nearer to the heart of the one who heals. Remember this, God is not merely dealing with them. He is preparing you. And when his work is finished, your pain will not be a scar of defeat, but a testimony of triumph. There is an undeniable tension within the human heart when injustice lingers. We see those who have wronged us prospering, walking freely without any visible consequence for their actions. It is a painful reality, one that often leaves us questioning whether justice will ever be served. But we must understand that God's justice is not like human justice. It is not bound by the limitations of time, nor does it operate in the ways we expect. When we cry out for retribution, we often desire an immediate response, a visible reckoning that reassures us that wrong will not go unpunished. However, God does not work on our schedule. His justice is inevitable, but it unfolds in ways beyond our understanding. Throughout history, we see evidence that no evil goes unnoticed. Even when the guilty seem to thrive, their prosperity is short-lived in the grand design of eternity. Consider the many tyrants and oppressors who have walked the earth, believing themselves invincible. They built kingdoms, amassed wealth, and wielded power over others, but in the end, they all fell. Some fell by the hand of men, others by the slow unraveling of their own wickedness, and some faced their judgment only beyond this life. But not one of them escaped the justice of God. It is tempting to believe that if we do not see justice immediately, then it does not exist. This belief, however, comes from a misunderstanding of God's nature. He is not hasty, nor is he indifferent. He sees all things, and he judges with perfect wisdom. Unlike human judgment, which is often clouded by emotion, bias, or incomplete knowledge, God judges righteously. He does not act out of impulse, but from the fullness of truth. If he withholds immediate judgment, it is not because he has forgotten, but because he is working all things according to his perfect will. We must also recognize that God's justice is not merely about punishment. It is about restoration, correction, and redemption. There are times when those who wrong us are given an opportunity to repent, to recognize their wrongdoing and change their ways. This too is justice, though it may not always align with our desire for retribution. If God chooses to humble a person rather than destroy them, it is because his justice is aimed at something far greater than mere revenge. It is aimed at the redemption of souls. This does not mean that all will choose the path of repentance. Some persist in their wrongdoing, hardened in their ways. Even then, they do not escape the consequences of their actions. The world operates under the divine law of sowing and reaping. A person may deceive, betray, or harm others for a time, but they cannot escape the inevitable fruit of their deeds. Sin carries within itself the seeds of destruction. A dishonest person may thrive for a season, but eventually their deception catches up with them. A cruel individual may enjoy power for a time, but their actions will ultimately lead to their downfall. The greatest test of faith is trusting that God is working even when we do not see it. The pain of being wronged is real, and the desire for justice is natural. But we must not allow impatience to shake our trust in God's plan. Just as a seed takes time to grow into a great tree, so too does divine justice unfold in its appointed time. We are not called to carry the burden of vengeance. That is God's responsibility, and He carries it perfectly. So let us take comfort in this truth. No injustice escapes God's sight, and no wrongdoing will go unanswered. The guilty may run, but they cannot hide from the one who sees all. Those who hurt us may seem to go unpunished, but their story is not yet finished. God's justice is never late, nor is it absent. It is merely waiting for the appointed time, and when that time comes, it will be undeniable, irreversible, and complete. Forgiveness is often misunderstood. Many believe that to forgive is to excuse wrongdoing, to diminish the pain caused, or to allow injustice to prevail. This could not be further from the truth. Forgiveness is not a weakness, nor is it a passive acceptance of evil. Instead, it is an act of strength, a declaration that the one who has been wronged will not be held captive by the weight of their suffering. It is a refusal to let bitterness take root in the soul, poisoning every thought and action. When we are hurt, our natural instinct is to hold on to that pain. We replay the offense in our minds, reliving the betrayal, the cruelty, or the injustice. We want the one who wronged us to suffer as we have suffered, to feel the weight of their actions. But in doing so, we unknowingly bind ourselves to the very pain we long to be free from. Bitterness is a prison, and the only key to release is forgiveness. This does not mean that the hurt disappears instantly. It does not mean that trust is restored or that consequences vanish. Forgiveness is not the erasure of justice, but rather the surrendering of personal vengeance. It is entrusting justice into the hands of God, knowing that He alone can judge righteously. He sees what we do not. He knows the heart, the motives, and the full story. While our judgment is clouded by emotion, His is perfect. To forgive is to acknowledge that we are not the ultimate judge, and that we do not need to carry the burden of retribution. Many fear that forgiving means becoming vulnerable again, opening themselves up to further harm. But forgiveness does not demand reconciliation. It does not mean allowing the offender back into one's life without wisdom and discernment. There are times when trust cannot be restored, and that is acceptable. Forgiveness is about freeing oneself, not about removing necessary boundaries. It is entirely possible to forgive someone while still maintaining distance and protecting one's well-being. Forgiveness is not just for the benefit of the offender, it is for the healing of the wounded. When Christ forgave those who crucified him, he did not do so because they deserved it. He did not do it because they had repented or sought his mercy. He did it because he refused to let hatred define his purpose. He demonstrated that true strength is found not in retaliation, but in the ability to love, despite the wounds inflicted. This is the power of forgiveness. It releases the soul from the chains of resentment. It allows one to move forward unburdened by the past. To hold on to anger is to allow the one who hurt us to continue influencing our lives. It gives them control over our thoughts, emotions, and even our future. But to forgive is to take back that power. It is to declare that no person, no betrayal, and no wound will dictate one's destiny. There is also a profound mystery in forgiveness. It opens the door for God's justice to operate fully. When we insist on holding on to resentment, we are, in a sense, trying to take God's role into our own hands. But when we release our pain to Him, we make room for Him to work as only He can. The justice of God is far more complete than any human retaliation. It reaches beyond the surface, addressing the deeper issues of the heart and soul. Forgiveness does not erase the past, but it allows a person to live beyond it. It transforms suffering into wisdom, pain into growth, and injustice into testimony. It is not forgetting what has been done, but choosing not to be defined by it. It is not a sign of defeat, but a sign of triumph. The triumph of the Spirit over the wounds of the world. And in that triumph, there is freedom. Pain has a way of making us question everything. When we are hurt, betrayed, or mistreated, it can feel as though the world is unjust, as though suffering is meaningless. But nothing that God allows in our lives is without purpose. The wounds inflicted by others, though painful, are not wasted. They become instruments in God's hands, shaping us into something far greater than we could have imagined. What we see as suffering, He sees as refining. What we perceive as injustice, He uses as preparation. Gold is purified in fire. The process is not gentle. It requires intense heat, melting away impurities, leaving behind only what is valuable. In the same way, suffering removes what is unnecessary within us. It reveals our true character, our hidden weaknesses, and the areas of our hearts that still need transformation. If we allow it, pain can make us more compassionate, wiser, and stronger. It can deepen our dependence on God, teaching us to trust Him in ways that comfort never could. One of the greatest dangers of suffering is bitterness. When others harm us, we can become consumed with resentment, allowing our wounds to define us. We may build walls around our hearts, convinced that if we remain guarded, we will never be hurt again. But in doing so, we do not protect ourselves. We imprison ourselves. The very pain that could have refined us instead becomes the weight that holds us back. The challenge then is not simply to endure suffering, but to allow it to do its work within us. Joseph, the son of Jacob, is a powerful example of this. Betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, and later imprisoned for a crime he did not commit, he had every reason to grow bitter. Yet instead of being destroyed by his suffering, he allowed it to refine him. He remained faithful, trusting that God was at work even when he could not see the full picture. And in time, the very trials that once seemed like his downfall became the means of his elevation. When he finally stood before his brothers as a ruler in Egypt, he did not seek revenge. Instead, he recognized the divine purpose behind his suffering, saying, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." This is the perspective that changes everything. When we understand that God is not only aware of our suffering, but actively using it for our growth, we begin to see pain differently. It no longer feels like a curse, but a tool. We stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and instead ask, "What is God teaching me through this?" Every hardship, every betrayal, and every injustice becomes an opportunity for transformation. There is also a hidden strength that emerges through suffering. Those who have walked through fire and allowed God to refine them come out unshaken. They develop a resilience that cannot be imitated, a depth of faith that cannot be manufactured. Their testimony becomes a light for others who are still in the midst of their struggles. The wounds they once carried with shame become marks of God's faithfulness. God never wastes pain. He is not only dealing with those who hurt you, He is preparing you. He is strengthening your character, deepening your wisdom, and equipping you for a future you cannot yet see. What seems like a breaking point is often the moment when He is reshaping you into something greater. And when His work is complete, you will not simply have survived your trials, you will have been transformed by them.